I really enjoy having images at times because for me, I think they can help illustrate an experience. And I think especially with a lot of personality disorders, but with narcissism, I think that image of just this entanglement of the mind, this entanglement of understanding what's going on around you, um, is a very similar experience that I've heard a lot of people that I've worked with have. Um, so I just wanted to start with that image that it can just feel like you are tied up in knots and trapped and don't know where to go, don't even know what thread to begin to pull, because it's hard to put words to an experience. So, this is a beautiful painting of Narcissus. So, the term narcissism comes from the Greek myth of Narcissus, and I'm not going to go into that, but Narcissus was an extraordinarily handsome, beautiful man who everyone wanted, and he's like wanted nothing to do with other people. And he caused so much harm to so many other people that he eventually was um, the in the Greek mythology, Nemesis, the goddess of revenge, like had him go and stare and had him stare at himself, and he saw his reflection for the first time in his life. And Narcissus was enthralled by his own image, and he could not ever move, and he eventually wasted away. And this myth actually holds what we like as narcissism and narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder. This is the framework of how it's understood that there is this love of an image that is a shell, it is a lie, it is this thing that they're trying to uphold. And it is destructive. Just as we see in the myth, it is destructive to Narcissus, it's destructive to people around him as well. It is not a happy myth, to say the least. So when we first look, before I can even go into narcissism, I need to talk about from a psychological perspective. One of the things that we look at is the personality psychology. So if you were to ever go get a personality assessment, they are based on the big five personality traits here that I'm going to just quickly go through. So, agreeableness, extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness, and openness. So, what all of these are referring to, and I can go into detail what those are covering, is that for personality psychology, personality is referring to an enduring characteristics and behavior that comprise a person's unique adjustment to life. So we all have a personality. It is how we have interacted with the world. And the key words here is that it is enduring characteristics and behavior. Our personality is one that continues to have this consistency. So, and we can see it emerge in life. So I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I've already started to see her personality start to unfold. There's a way that she is showing up in the world. There are things like she is very much of a people person. She loves to please and make people laugh. I've also seen that she's quite anxious. Like at an early age, she would, like we had parent teacher conferences, and she was extremely worried because she thought she was in trouble. And there were, even though there was no indication of this, so we can see that at a young age, we see personalities emerge. And for parents that I've worked with who have multiple children, they will often talk about how their children can have very different personalities, even though they're parenting the same way. So this is where, and so we, as in psychology, we're looking at, okay, personality are going to be these consistent ways of which a person is. Um, and it is a structure that is most likely consistent throughout life, and it is there can be shifts to it, so it's not like this rigid structure. We want a personality that's flexible. For the most part, you're not going to see vast changes to personality. If you were to see that, a lot of times that's where people are like, oh, was there like a brain tumor, or is there a traumatic brain injury, or things that could very much change personality, because drastic personality changes are can be concerning. So with these five, a lot of them, I'm not going to go in depth on each one, but like agreeableness, is what it is. Like there are people who are very agreeable. They want to like sometimes maybe too much where they're people pleasing, but they want to work well with others. They want to be cooperative. But then the other side of that would be people who are not wanting to work with others, who are very sometimes hostile or can be a little porcupine. Like they're not going to want to work well with others. Extroversion is really referring to wanting to be around people, like getting energy or getting wanting to work with people, whereas other people, like introverts, this isn't like a bad thing. Like they want to be by themselves or secluded more from social situations. Neuroticism is it's actually this is a term used very early on in the development of psychology, and it's really looking at one's ability to cope with psychological stress. So this could refer to anxiety, depression. So there are some personalities you can see they have a higher tolerance. Some have like like they're going to be more reactive to emotions. Conscientiousness is like understanding how your behaviors are like affecting others and being mindful of that. And there are people who will make sure that they are very conscientious and looking out and being careful. And then you'll see other people where they will kind of throw caution to the wind or they're like they don't care. And the last one is openness. All of our personalities, some people are very open to new experiences and other people are close to them. This could be something as simple as like going skydiving. I'm sure in this group, there might be some people who would be like, let's go right now. I am open to this experience. That sounds like a blast. And then other people who would be like, nope, that does not sound fun at all. So these are the personality types that have been well researched. So these are what they see. And this is the framework of really like when we start looking at the personality disorders, especially in the DSM. So the DSM stands for Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and we are in the fifth edition, and there was just a text revision. So this is the Bible for mental health disorders. And the personality disorders are based on this personality framework, but then it looks at what happens when it becomes pathological. Okay, so to start out, there we'll go right with the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. So within the DSM, there are actually multiple, I think there's 14 personality disorders, and they are organized into three clusters. So you have A, B, and C. Crudely speaking, to put it this way, A are they're the weird personalities. This is where you see personality disorders with a lot of magical thinking or bizarre behaviors that don't meet the criteria of any other mental health disorder. Cluster B, which is where narcissistic personality disorder resides, is the dramatic cluster. So this is where you see borderline, histrionic, antisocial personality disorder, and narcissism as well. And then cluster C is the anxious personality disorders. So why I think it's important to highlight that is because narcissistic personality disorder is in that dramatic one. And you can see with this model on the left is that these are very brief definitions of what the criteria are. So as a clinician, I can diagnose any disorder from the DSM. And if there are for narcissistic personality disorder, there would need to be 5 of the 8 of these that are present and enduring in a person's personality. So this is where you start to see this grandiose sense of self-importance, the frequent fantasies of having or deserving praise or wealth or power, the beliefs of superiority, the need for admiration, entitlement, willingness to exploit others, the lack of empathy, and frequent envy. So that's the definition, or those are the criteria that I would be looking for when it goes through that. And there are formal assessments that are, I would say they are extremely helpful in the diagnostic process, but they are not needed. I don't need to complete all these assessments to diagnose it. If I work with someone and I am like have done a thorough assessment and I feel like this is the correct diagnosis, I would be able to move forward with that. Um, Real quick on who can diagnose. So, in the world of mental health, like you have psychiatrists, psychologists, and then Veronica, I see your hand. Just I'll finish this point. And then you have marriage and family therapists, mental health clinicians, and then also social workers. All five of those licenses would be able to diagnose personality disorders. I'll pause there. And attend to the hand.
I feel like I'm in class. This is fun. So I have a question. So I
Yeah.
bet that there's probably not a lot of diagnosed narcissists, because if a narcissist wouldn't go and be like, "Hey, I'm a narcissist, come diagnose me." Like they have too much ego to even
Yeah.
go to therapy. So how do we, I guess my question is, how does a narcissist get diagnosed? Because I doubt that a narcissist would go by themselves to therapy and seek it out. At least I know the
Yeah.
people in my life, like they would never do that. So
Yeah. So,
how
and
does
this
it
is
happen?
why it's a very like a lot of times clinicians they won't have a narcissist come in for individual treatment. A lot of times how you'll see it is it will be like with couples therapy or family therapy, which is really, I would say, dangerous, because you're bringing the system in and the narcissist is wanting to blame everyone. They're wanting to like not be the problem, and they're able to manipulate. And I'm going to go more into this about like, I mean, it's the harm that clinicians can do. It's the harm that people do when they don't realize what they're butting up against, that it can be very um, damaging to the people around the narcissists, where all of a sudden they feel like, wow, even professionals aren't seeing what I'm seeing. It can be really, it can be just so damaging and reinforce a lot of the gaslighting or the like, I can't believe my own experience, or I can't make sense of this because even other people can't see it, which is why it's really hard to diagnose. And I would say it's easier to diagnose when you have someone with narcissistic personality disorder who isn't doing well at life. So I think a lot of times you so I'll use some clinical examples today, and I'm changing information around to keep confidentiality. But I did work with someone who I did diagnose with narcissistic personality disorder, but this individual was not succeeding by the eyes of the world, with career, with relationships. And when I met with him, it was a lot of like, the world doesn't see my talents. The world, like, I work so hard at my relationships, but no one wants to love me in the way that I think I like. So it's a lot of kind of this, it's like victim entitlement, like they have all these gifts that haven't been discovered. So it was a place where they could come and allow me to just kind of hold like their frustration of what they weren't getting. Whereas like there's been some studies that show like probably a lot of CEOs or really high performing individuals probably have like maybe not full like criteria, but they have a lot of characteristics of narcissism because they're really good. Like surgeons, like one study I read that a lot of surgeons like would probably meet the criteria, but they like like how like for their job, it's beneficial to be I'm the best. Everyone needs to listen to me. I should be admired. And they get that reinforcement. If they save a child's life, they're going to get that reinforcement from the family, and it can just fuel that and it can go undetected. So one of the things that I think is really important is that there is the full-blown disorder, and one of the biggest markers with it is that it has to be causing distress and dysfunction and problems in the individual's life. So one critique I would have of most of the DSM is that it's really like it's very much focused on the individual and doesn't always have a relational or systemic look at it, because there are a lot of mental health disorders that I would argue are probably more damaging to the people around the individual and instead of the individual itself. So so a lot of the times, the criteria isn't met because they might not be in distress. They're like, my life is great. What are you talking about? Like, but it's the people around them that are really struggling. So the other thing is that what's hard is that the DSM is really rigid in the sense that it's trying to meet like five of the eight criteria. And if it's all five, if five aren't there, it's technically not narcissistic personality disorder. That doesn't mean, even without a formal diagnosis, there can be narcissistic traits and behaviors that are just as damaging and wounding to the individual and the people around them. And I think so, like, a lot of times people like disorders because it brings clarity to a situation. But it doesn't always, that's not always the case because as a clinician, it's like, but they don't meet the criteria. But at the same time, can be very toxic traits and behaviors having serious consequences in the lives of the individual and the people around them. Which brings me to how we're like the research being done is that there's a lot of new research coming out that is in the literature, but it's not going to be formal diagnosis. And I'm just curious if anyone has ever come across this concept of the dark triad. Okay, I see some people have. So this is a relatively new, like 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 a new discovery. So it was first published by a Canadian psychologist in 2002. And all of these, what is important is I'm going to use the phrase subclinical. And what that means is that it would probably not come up for a clinician, a mental health clinician, because the person would be very successful. They would be like being able to maintain relationships and things like that. But these traits are going to come out and they are going to have this very shadow side of how their life is functioning. And it's very damaging. So the dark triad, and there's been a lot of buildup around this, is it's this intersection of three types of personality. So we have narcissism, which we just went over, but it's also this combination of psychopathy and you're going to have to forgive my pronunciation here. Machiavel, the lady. Excuse me.
Machiavellianism. Ugh.
Thank you, thank
Machiavellianism,
you,
I think.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So what you see here is we actually see you bring in these other dynamics where you continue to have this lack of empathy, but with psychopathy, you're also now introducing this impulsiveness or irresponsibility or the lack of guilt or remorse, which is different from lack of empathy. So lack of empathy is where like they're not willing to put themselves in another person's shoes and feel what another person is feeling or try to understand someone else's experience. Lack of remorse or guilt is I don't care that I messed up or I hurt you, and I'm not even like gonna apologize. So that brings in another element that narcissism wouldn't have, but we see that there's this group of people that consistently have more than just narcissism. It takes on other things as well. Um, they're also like narcissists can be manipulative, but like it's like bringing in this other one is where you start to see there's very calculated way of controlling relationships. So this is where we can start seeing abuse cycles that start to happen, where there's like this control that happens, and and as you can see, all three of these together are this is a dangerous combination, and it's like it's very, to put it in a spiritual term, it's very evil. But it's also for like psychologically, it's destructive to relationships and it's very self-centered. It is all about getting their needs met and they will hurt and exploit whoever they need to make sure that their image of what they think they are wanting remains intact. Okay. I think, oh, yeah, Veronica.
Yeah. Do you mind actually just going back to that slide, Jameson?
Yeah, of course.
Oops, I muted myself. Wonderful. Two questions. First one is if someone is going through like a criminal trial and a forensic accountant or forensic psychiatrist has been brought on to assess the parties, do forensic psychiatrists, are they more highly trained to spot the dark triad or NPD in a criminal trial? Is that part of their expertise?
I would so with like so one of the things that I would say is if like when like sometimes like a forensic psychologist, it's like I would see like there's probably this generalist who can do a lot of things. It's the specialist. So you would want to find someone where it's like, okay, I'm now in this field, but I'm also now really specializing here. And that's one of the biggest things about for anyone who would go out and seek like a mental health professional. It is very important that it's like, oh, like I'll just take whoever, like, because the field is very vast. Like my specialty, like even though I teach about the DSM and personality disorders, I've worked with narcissism, but my specialty is working with trauma and like identity development, especially after trauma. Like who am I after all of that has happened? And I think that's probably a mistake that some people make, like with the forensic psychologist, is they're like, oh, this person will catch it, but if they don't have the training or if they're not looking for it or they don't have that nuanced way, my hope is that like you like they are definitely looking for things, but there are, I mean, one of the things about personality disorders is they are very good at acting when they need to be. They know when they need to put on a face and have that good image. And I think that's one of the hard things is as a professional, I see people maybe once a week, and that's really easy to like act for a week or for an hour and then let that go. So like for that, it's like for forensics psychologists, I'm sure that there are variations of expertise and making sure that like if you're working with a lawyer that you're getting the right one to really make sure that they are supporting the case would be very important. Just like for couples therapy, there are people specifically trained to work with narcissists. They understand how to do it. They know how to engage the narcissists, to call them out on their behaviors and not to let it take over. But that is, I would say, special training. You just wouldn't want to go to anyone who's like, I'm a couples therapist, and then hope that they can manage that. So,
Makes sense. I also just want to throw it out to the audience. If anyone has a question, feel free to jump in or raise your hand and go ahead and ask. And if not, we'll continue. And if you do have a question, you can just on the bottom bar, there's an option under the react button. You press that and you press raise hand, and then we'll know for sure if you have a question that you want to ask. Or if you do right now, go ahead. Catherine.
Sorry, wasn't sure which button to press. I have a question. So I I'm just thinking kind of connecting it to the broader cultural perspective. Like obviously we're in an age of social media, and we see reality TV, and how much of that is like influencing it is something like what is kind of the root cause? Like is us from a psychological perspective, is this something that we're just is it more common now because of what we're seeing around us, or has this kind of always been in human history, but we just have more tools now to diagnose it? Because I feel like to some extent we all have just temptations maybe to be like a little bit more obsessed with ourselves in this generation compared to the previous generations.
So I think like as we go through if you went through history, I'm sure the culture of the time, what was going on, that's all gonna change like how it's expressed or how it looks. But this was really, I mean, I think like late 1800s, there was people writing about this dynamic, this like self-centeredness and it's just like destructiveness to the person's life and the lives around them. So it has definitely been ongoing, like it's something that we're aware of. I think even like the Greeks having a myth where like it's about a completely self-absorbed person who is so focused on his image allowed them to even key in on like this is something that is there. And it's destructive. Like in the myth, Narcissus dies because he can't stop looking at his image. So in the age of social media, so I have my phone here, they actually will talk about how our phones are a reflection of ourself. Is what we want to see. So we can see that we do kind of have a culture that is very much like when you're on the computer, you now have cookies and people are learning about you, and your screens tell you exactly who you are, what you're looking for, what you're interested in, and it's a reflection. And I think it's important sometimes to step away from that. But here's the thing about someone with narcissism is they can't step away from it. Their image is their God. Like they need to uphold that and they will cling to it. And that is something that we see. It's a personality disorders from a clinical perspective are some of the hardest to treat. This is where you see years long psychotherapy, because typically medication can help maybe alleviate behaviors, but like the true treatment of and having that like reconnection with themselves, letting go of the image, is it's hard. It's very difficult to transform that process. Um, I will say, but in like to really get to your question, I always when I talk to my students, I hate social media. So if you're a social media person, I realize that there's benefits to it. You can stay connected. I don't like it at all. I think it's extremely toxic. Like if you go on TikTok, mental health now, it's like people will be like bragging about what disorders they have. Like I'm bipolar and borderline and depressed, and like they'll like it is a thing of pride. And I think that's really damaging. I don't think that's helpful. And I think it kind of feeds into this like, look at me. I want views, I want clicks, which can feed into that kind of narcissistic tendencies, which I guess this is something that just popped into my head right here. I want to normalize that. Like when I think of narcissism, it really is a spectrum. Like we all have narcissistic tendencies. Like I like I'll be honest, I kind of hope that I'm doing well right now and that I like there's might be some admiration like that I'm not completely bombing this. So I think what it's showing is that this is actually out of something good. Like there's a part of us that wants to connect, to know that we're doing well, that we are called to a greatness, but it gets twisted, it gets perverted into something very like that's what narcissistic personality disorder. So I think that's one of the things that we can see is the culture will take this word, and when I do couples therapy, I'll work with people, and if they don't, if like they'll just throw that out so quickly. I think my partner's a narcissist, and I'm like, okay, let's slow down. Like, what does that word even mean to you? Like, just because your partner has a different view of the fight doesn't mean he's a narcissist or she's a narcissist. It's like this is also like part of being in a relationship. Catherine, did I kind of get to your question there?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
So I think for people with who have intimately been exposed to narcissism in one way or another, there can be this like, why does this happen? Um, and to be very frank up front, we don't know. But there are a lot of theories out there. So there have been genetic studies that show that there is a genetic component that some people are predisposed to certain personality types. Um, so maybe they're not going to be as empathetic or they're going to be more rigid. So they can see a genetic component to it. But one of the strongest theories is around environment. So this is where I actually think the Catholic Church's teaching about the family as the building block of society is so beautiful, because I do think it sets the framework. Our all of our family systems growing up, and I'm going to be one of those crazy psychologists that I would want to know about your family and your mother and your father, because our family sets the building blocks to everything. Like the way you understand emotions, the way you communicate, conflict resolution, beliefs, values, all of that, your family set the foundation to. And as you developed and grew, of course, you started to maybe question them or take on new things. But family is important. And one of the theories that they look at is a lot of times if an individual grew up in a family where they were praised all the time and they could do no wrong, that can be problematic because their personality is not being developed in a way to be open or to like they're basically being taught like you're great, and it just continues to like grow and fester, um, and it emerges as a problematic personality. There's another one where it talks about like narcissism can even happen if for individuals who are completely deprived. So it's like their coping mechanism against what they went through is they were so neglected or so abused that they kind of had this knee-jerk reaction to go the other way that I like look what like I'm now great. I have to have I like this other way of coping with what has happened. So um I as a systemic therapist, so that means I like to look at, our relationships and things like that. I really believe that there's these transgenerational things that a lot of people aren't aware of, that there are meanings and beliefs that happen from one generation to the next. And a lot of individuals I worked where I've talked to people about narcissism or they'll talk about their family, it's not like there's just one in the family. A lot of times there can be kind of a cluster of them, or there can be maybe another person there. So you start to see that like there is this pattern that is emerging and like that is upholding like space for this personality, this disregard of other people or needing to be seen as great or the center of attention. Um, and what we have to realize with all of this is that a narcissist truly does live in a fantasy world. They have like when we look at from a psychological perspective, when what they have developed is that there's this self-deception about who they are, and there's this magical thinking about how great they are, their need for affirmation to be able to have a sense of superiority and control. And that's what a lot of personality disorders, so this isn't just narcissism, but a lot of personality disorders are really masking a lot of pain and suffering within, and it's their way of trying to control others, the environment, so that they can feel a sense of security. So, for individuals, there have been successful treatments of narcissists, and when they have done studies about them afterwards, and during the course of treatment, one of the things that they start to realize is even though that how they present, they're thinking they're great and superior and they're the only thing that matters, is really underneath all of that is extreme low self-esteem, shame, and doubt. And it's often unconscious. They don't really probably understand that that's there. And their personality is the defense about encountering that. They're like, to use a psychobabble word, they have low ego strength. So ego is like when you think about when you talk in the I, like I am giving a presentation right now, that would be my ego. And there's times that we receive criticism, that we receive praise. So our ego is the one that filters all of that. For a lot of personality disorders, their ego is not strong enough to handle reality. So they create this is why the personality emerges that is problematic. It's their defense against feeling all shame and doubt and low self-esteem, because I think we like let's be real, feeling our feelings at times is absolutely terrible and brutal. um I have so many people I work with in my practice where they know they need to do the work but they're so afraid to do it. It's like they have this like very intuitive sense of like how much pain and suffering, but they know they need to do it at the same time. So I'm going to pause here. Is there any questions just kind of on this before I shift into the next slide? I'm going to pause.
Hi, my name is Dana.
Hey, Dina.
So if have a partner who has narcissistic behaviors, and
Mhm.
we love the narcissist when they're a good person.
Yeah.
But they have, so say they have the genetics, which can't be changed, and say they have this low self-esteem because of adoption and being, you know, hit as a child, and they've gotten to this point where this is how they're coping. How would a narcissist ever go ahead and be open to therapy if they think they are the greatest and their opinion is the bestest, and they're
Yeah.
not ever going to listen to someone else because you have to, 99% of the time they're going to be talking and putting their thoughts on everyone else and
Yeah.
controlling the world. Like, how do you ever, is there, how do you ever have any hope that they're going to go ahead and be able to identify that that's where they're at and even move towards a place where they can be in a relationship that's
Yeah.
healthy?
Really good question. And like I want to say it does depend. There's so many factors. Like if I was working with this individual that I would like go through. And I think what's really hard is recognizing there is the personal relationship, like trying to help someone get help when you think they need it. And if you think about it, this is a struggle for so many individuals and couples and families. I think about like work I've done with like substance use. Like someone needs someone, there's an addiction happening, it is wreaking havoc, but they won't admit it. They won't go get the help, no matter how hard you try. Or maybe someone has really like an eating disorder, and it's really problematic, but they won't get help. They won't accept it. Like this is, I think, it's a universal pain. Um, like to have hope, to love someone, and at the same time, it's hard to move them in a direction. It often reminds me in the Gospels. I believe it's John chapter 5, when Jesus healing story, where Jesus encounters a man and he looks at him and he says, "Do you want to be healed?" And I think that's a very profound statement. And I'm going to take it from a psychological perspective, which is like, do you want, like, we really have to choose. I want to enter into this. I want to say, yes, I do want to be healed. But Dana, to get to your question on a more practical level, especially with narcissism. So I had a supervisor who specialized in personality disorders, and I was in supervision one time, and he often would use this phrase: "You have to soothe the narcissist." And what that means is we have to play to their personality, which is actually really painful. As a clinician, I'm able to do that. But as people who are personally in relationship with them, that is the most painful thing to do. It's like, I'm already suffering, I'm already going through this, and now I have to placate your personality. But the reason being, from a clinical perspective, is to get them to even start to think, we kind of have to play their game. Like, I will, like, so from like if a narcissist were to go, they wouldn't want to go to a master's level clinician. They want to go to the best person because they deserve the best person. They want to see someone who has a PhD or an MD behind their name because those are higher degrees and they'll feel better about it because they're special. They deserve the best treatment. So it's this hard process where you're like, okay, wow, like you have, like, you're so great. You've had so much going on and you've been trying so hard. But what would it be like to be able to take time and go see someone so that you could like really like like be better at this, or like, so you want to soothe that part of them, that their need for affirmation, their need to be great. Because if you go in and there's this criticism they feel where it's like, you're not doing enough, you're not that's where they'll get extra, they'll respond in a way that is damaging. So like from a clinician point of view, that's a lot of times, and this is where people in couples therapy can get really frustrated because they'll see the clinician like trying to engage them in a way, and they're just like, "Don't you see what they're doing?" Like, but to get them to buy into treatment, you really have to allow them to, like, they need to feel like they've been seen before they can go and touch in on those deeper wounds. So Dana, does that help answer some of that?
Well, I think that most people that are in a relationship with a narcissist already soothe and play into it on a daily
Yeah.
basis, like 99% of the time.
Yeah.
I think they're already doing that to just live with a narcissist.
Yes. And I think that's the difference there. From a clinician point of view, it's very pointed. It's like I'm trying to get to, like, I am doing this for a very pointed reason. Whereas what you talked about, the reason that that soothing is happening is so I can survive, so I can live with you, so we can function. And that's often where a lot of people feel trapped. Like it's, I don't know what to do with this, because it is hard. One thing I will say that I've learned over and over again in my career, if someone does not want treatment, like it's hard to do treatment. Like they have to be like willing to go and explore it. And I wish there was this magical or this perfect line or phrase to give you, but it is very it's it's a very difficult thing to navigate. And some of that is be like setting clear boundaries and being clear about it. Sometimes just that consistency of like, I really want you to go for this. I think it would be beneficial. And being consistent, because sometimes that can help in the long run.
I might just add one more thing if I can to that topic. Obviously,
Please,
not
please.
from an expert by any means, but from my own personal experience, I think something that's important as well is to remember that in order to start our healing journey, we don't have to wait for someone to join in on that. We're not going to convince someone to start to change. So we can really only just focus on ourselves. And I know it's so hard within a partnership, a marriage, if you have kids, it gets really complicated. But if you focus on getting the help and the treatment that you need, eventually you're going to have stronger boundaries and the narcissist is going to have to change. Maybe they won't change, but you're not going to adapt or change for the narcissist. And that's going to affect how they interact with you because they need to see those hard boundaries. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like I can't expect the narcissist in my life to admit they're wrong to go to therapy, but I can do what I need to do to equip myself to start my healing journey. And then by result of me healing, the people around me are going to have to change because I'm changing my boundaries and how I'm going to be interacted with. So I don't know if that helps, but
Beautifully said. Okay. Well, this is kind of media, like as we were talking about the effects on others. That's what I want to shift it to, because I think Veronica completely did a beautiful segue for me, which is um, really the this narcissism, personality disorders. They have a vast effect on others, and they're long lasting. Because one of the things about being in relationship with a personality disorder or narcissistic tendencies or things like that is it's a traumatic wound that is hard to label and name at times. And going and doing your own work is very important because and I'm sure all of you can probably speak much more volumes around this, but my clinical experience of working with individuals who had a partner or parent or even a boss who had narcissistic tendencies is there's a lot of identity confusion, like difficulties expressing their experience, which is psychologically speaking extremely distressing, because we want to be able to tell people how we're doing. It's how we connect. So when we can't be able to express what's going on in a relationship or put words to it, or the moment we start speaking, we feel like we're getting wrapped around ourselves. Like that's distressing. And and then we start to be like, well, maybe I just suck at talking. Like maybe my brain is messed up that I can't do that. And none of that is false, because what's happening is this graph that I have. This is really speaking to what happens when we encounter trauma or distressing events. So I'm hoping as I'm talking, a lot of you are staying in this window of tolerance, which is how we live most of our life, hopefully, where we're grounded, we're flexible, we can be open and curious, we're able to regulate emotions as they come up. But what happens is that phrase, like if we get triggered, or if we start having experiences, we start to move into our flight, or freeze response, and that's just takes over. And it's an extremely, I mean, like God gave us that response for a reason because it helps us stay alive. It helps protect us. But a lot of times what happens, especially um, with being in relationship with a narcissist, is that we kind of get like, it's like the danger never goes away, or we're always walking on eggshells. We don't know what to expect, or a little behavior, tone of voice, all of that starts to trigger, and we start to move into sometimes unconscious patterns. So, and sometimes we can go hyper arousal or hypo arousal. But what this is looking at is like sometimes like hyper arousal is when we're gonna like fight or flight. We're moving away from, like, we're ready to engage the situation by either fighting it or flying from it. And we get hyper vigilant. Sometimes this is where we get overly anxious. We're high energy. We feel like we need to do something, and those chaotic thoughts starting taking over. And it's our body's response to being like, you're preparing for something. And there's a reason why you're preparing for something. Something has happened in the past that was wounding, whether it was psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and your body is responding, getting you ready to prepare for what is about to come. The other side of it, this would be like the freeze, or a lot of researchers are now calling it like the fawn, like animals will fawn, they'll fake dying, like possums, if they are attacked, they'll just pretend that they're dead. Um, Hypoarousal is where we shut down, where we just can't engage in it anymore. And a lot of times we see depression come in. It's the way of numbing what's happening in the world. Um, we start to be passive. We just allow things to happen because we just don't want to deal with it. Like if I don't engage it, I'll let it go. And when I work with individuals, so this is really in the realm of trauma, and I think everyone has some form of trauma one way or another, is that these are coping skills that help us survive. And when I work with people, it's like we want to thank these. They helped us. They got us through a lot of really hard stuff. But it's my job to help them realize we can also do this in new ways that will help you flourish and be the person that you were created to be, and to gain mastery of this cycle so that it's not this unconscious thing that just takes over, but rather you have a choice. This is happening. How do I want to respond? Like, okay, I want to set a boundary here. And now I'm able to do it because I've done the work to be able to do that. And I'm not just reacting to the situation. I'm going to pause here before moving on. Any comments or questions? All right. So I wanted, as we're speaking about narcissism on others, and we've kind of been alluding to this like throughout, but I really want to be like talk about two different things. The first one is parenting and co-parenting. I've worked with a lot of individuals. When children are involved, it greatly increases the anxiety, the worry, how to navigate this. There's a lot of questions. So when I say that statement there, be the stable one, there is this beautiful set of research that has come out. And I think it just fills me with so much hope that if a child has one stable adult in their life, they will do fine. That doesn't mean they're going to be without pain. They're going to be without like suffering. But there's research out there that shows that one stable adult, whether that is a parent, even a teacher, is such an incredible source of resilience and a protective factor. And I want to highlight that because when I've worked with people, they always feel like they're not doing enough. They have to protect. They don't know, especially if there's a divorce and the children go over to the narcissist's house and they have to let go of control. There's a lot of anxiety and worry about that. This is one where I'm like, okay, we can work on all of those anxieties. We can game plan, set boundaries, work with the legal system if that's a part of it. But we also are going to work really hard on how to be the one stable adult for your children, like so that you're showing up. And like I will say, I think in almost any type of personality disorder, they'll talk about how boundaries are so much of the key, because someone with narcissistic tendencies or the narcissistic personality disorder, what their movement is, it's their personality wants to colonize everyone and take over. And boundaries is the antidote against that. It is the way of being like, nope, not today. And being able to be clear with boundaries. Because when I work with people, they'll often, the way they talk about boundaries is not always completely correct. Because boundaries refer to, this is what I am going to do in a situation. It has nothing to do with other people. So I'll use a silly example. I'll use one with my daughter because parents set boundaries with their kids. It's like if I like so if let's say she gets angry and wants to hit. A boundary is like, Eleanor, if you hit me when you're angry, I will bring you up to your room. And what that does is I'm telling her, if you do this behavior, this is how I'm responding. And it doesn't like, and I then can act on it. I don't need you to help me. I'm now in control of what I'm going to do in this situation. So with a lot of individuals, whether with families or with a relationship, helping define what boundaries are needed at that time. And they're always developing and they're really hard. I want to pause there and just acknowledge boundary setting is really hard because especially if you are a people person and you want to have relationships with people, when you set boundaries, people get angry. People don't like it. They will push back and they will test boundaries. I mean, I see that with my 5-year-old. She tests boundaries all the time. Like whether it is about how many pieces of chocolate she can get or like what she can get away from. But as you can see, that's a very innocent, childlike way of doing it. Whereas a narcissist wants to remain in control. They don't want the boundary there because it starts to interfere with the way that they are feeling about themselves and the way that they want the world to be. So boundaries are really important work. The other thing is I have document, and this is my clinical brain coming out here. But I, especially if there is the legal system involved in whatever way, getting into a good practice of documenting and documenting correctly. This would be evidence and facts. And this is hard. So going back to that slide where it's hard to articulate what you're experiencing, it can be really hard to document in a way that is going to be helpful, like if a parenting plan is being redone and like not writing it in an emotional language, because lawyers will very much throw that out and not pay attention to it, but documenting evidence of this happened or this behavior occurred, because that's what they're going to look at. And I've realized, like individuals I worked with, it's so painful actually, like to have to document your life and relationships like that, and and just the pain that causes, but also the importance of it. Switching to couples, like I call them baby therapists. So they're all master level students training to become therapists. And I know for a fact that if a narcissist walked into their room, most of them would most likely be completely fooled. They would have because they haven't had the experience. They've read about it, but they don't really understand what that is. And there's a lot of research out there that is against, like, couples therapy with a narcissist does not work unless you have someone highly trained to know how to navigate that, because like it can actually just cause more problems, reinforce cycles, and then make the individual who is the survivor like not feel good about themselves. Like, why did I do that? I feel like even more like I'm the problem. Like, and the narcissist then can use like, see, even our therapist thinks like this, and like that's really like that's just adding fuel to the fire. So I'm always like, that's something when I work with couples I very much assess for. I meet with them together and then I meet with them individually, and I'm really trying to get a sense of like, do I feel good that this couple's ready to do the work to be beneficial? Or do I need to recommend individual therapy at this time? So that's my way of hopefully allowing someone who may have narcissistic tendencies to get into it, because as a vehicle through couples therapy. Just as I was preparing for this graph on the left here, I came across there's a lot of different like graphs about like the narcissistic relationship or different dynamics. And I just wanted to bring this up because one of the things like I I see these and I can see them as so grounding for people where they're like, oh, this matches my experience. Like first it's like we're really good, we're saying I love you, and all of a sudden I'm getting devalued. And then I get discarded, and then it's hovering, I miss you, and then we reconcile and we repeat again. And then for other people, I know that these may not match your experience. And I think that's something I really hold is that I see these things come out in social media where they're overly simplistic of someone's experience. And if they match, it feels really good. So it's like someone grounded your experience and it's like, this is it. And you're like, oh, that's me. But I also want to highlight that this might not be everyone's experience. And I think like when I work with people, I really want to like map, like tell me your experience of this. Because I understand why these things exist. I think they highlight probably very consistent patterns that show up. And at the same time, everyone has a unique relationship. Everyone has a unique experience that I just want to hold. Um, any questions about this or just anything that maybe is coming up as I've been talking?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is like, how are you supposed to deal with a narcissist? Like, what's if you're dealing with someone who's truly, like, truly bad, like abusive, narcissistic, maybe they're dark triad. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, what are you supposed to do in those situations? Avoid them, leave them. What's the answer?
So I I I appreciate the question. And once again, I'm going to say it depends because I do think and this is where I actually think being Catholic can be really hard. I've had a lot of conversations with priests and other um Catholic theologians and leaders where like marriage is sacred and it's for the lifetime, but at the same time I've worked with individuals where there's been horrific abuse, moved to like physical violence, and in my own good conscience I'm like I'm not going to tell someone, oh, you have to stay there, you have to, like, it's like no, I believe in safety. And um so safety is one of the biggest things, is that if I like, for me, if I see safety, whether that is physical or the psychological toll of working with someone who's a narcissist, like living and being with someone who's a narcissist, is constantly in suicidality, just wanting it to end, needing the pain to escape. That's where I am much more directive. I'm like, we need changes to happen because safety matters. I don't want death. I do not want destruction happening. So and that's what any mental health professional will do, is they're going to respond that way. Like every single state, we're mandated reporters. If we hear suicidality, we are required to respond, make sure that people are staying safe. So I'm going to say that, and that's kind of the extreme. But maybe leading into this, like what do we do? I think a lot of it, I like this idea of reclaiming your life, because a lot of times um, narcissists take over and it's hard. I love this image. So this is Our Lady Untier of Knots, or Undoer of Knots. I think it's a beautiful image. But I think it actually shows like, okay, this is what you do, is you have to do your own work to answer that question. Like, what do I do if I am in a relationship with a narcissist, or I have a parent who's a narcissist, or a sibling, or a boss, or whatever it could be? We have to start to untie the knots, because I don't think there's a simple answer to start out right away. Like if I met with someone and the first session they're like, "Tell me what to do. This is what's happening." I would not. Advice is a dangerous gift, or a dangerous gift to give, because I don't know everything. So I love this image, like where you see this massive knots, and it's trusting the process. We will untie the knots, and it may not right away. Like a lot of times people come into therapy and they're very like, I can just feel it. They're like, I need a change right now. I can't handle this. And it's my job to be able to be like, all right, I got you. We're going to take this first knot, we're going to untie it, and it's going to give us new insight. It's going to help us connect with a part of you that was lost. So people may argue with me, and I love pushback, but I think, we all have trauma, and I think being in relationship with a narcissist has some degree of trauma. And when trauma occurs, I think we get disconnected from really important parts of ourselves. We start to believe a lie about ourselves. And my role as a therapist is to help people get reconnected with these lost parts that can be wonderful assets and agents to understand this is how now I'm going to choose to respond to the narcissist in my life. That I'm going to start having control of whether it's boundaries, the choices I'm making, because that is going to help someone make the right decision. So I think Saint Ignatius of Loyola was a psychological master, way ahead of his time. So one of pardon me if you've heard this, but he has this thing called discernment of spirits. And crudely summarized, if I may, he talks about how you should never make decisions when you're at the highest of the high or the lowest of the low. That we need to be able to find this balance, because when we're in either place, we're not at a decision to make, we're not ready to make a decision. And I think that's a space what therapy can provide, or like what I hope I can give the people I work with is we're in a crisis. Let's gather this together, reconnect with parts of yourself that you're going to make a decision that you are going to be proud of, that is going to be life-giving to you, and that you're going to be able to work through. And I think something that's really helpful when is I think it's like these are actually painful questions, I know, but I actually pay attention a lot. That I think like when we're processing something that has been painful in our life, we have questions that emerge. And I think these questions are extremely telling, because when they keep coming up again and again, I think it tells us, wow, I'm wrestling with this and I keep thinking. So why do I keep finding narcissists? There's and I think there's people I've worked with where it's like, why do I keep finding people who will cheat on me? Why do I keep finding people who dismiss my emotions? So this is a question. It's like, what's going on that it's like I keep falling back into these relationships, these patterns, or this question here, like, will a narcissist ever change? And I think these questions are really important to key in on, because I think they're little signals that help us understand where I think the psyche and one's soul is wanting to go. It's helping us understand these questions are there for a reason, and we need to fully explore why they're there, because a lot of times that will be connected to other things that are yet to be discovered. So I will pause there and just see if there's any questions or comments or anything that's come up.
Saw some questions in the chat. I'll ask them just in case people don't feel comfortable asking them. So one question was, sorry. Is it possible for a narcissist or someone who's in the dark triad to be really bad at love bombing so that they're not seen, like they're not discovered?
Yes. I mean, I always think it's possible. I've been a clinician now for 10 years, and the one thing that I have realized is that I have never seen it all. Like, just when I think I have, something else emerges and I'm like, well, I wasn't expecting that. I think this shows a lot of times we have this experience and we keep with that question I'm hearing, I want to have this stability. I want to be able to categorize. I want to understand, is this happening, or are they really bad at love bombing? And yes, it probably is possible that there is someone out there who is like that. And this is why I think really paying attention, finding a community that can help validate and understand what you're going through is very important. And at the same time, recognizing that you're having a unique experience. And that's actually a really important tension to hold. I think about going to mass, that is such a communal experience, like we're in it, like we're there worshiping together. But if you look around, like sometimes after I receive, I look around and like you can see someone just like with this huge smile on their face, like having a very different experience than someone a few rows back who is crying. And I think it's like, okay, like finding, like recognizing that like there are going to be these generalizations and ways of understanding it. And at the same time, you're going to have a very unique experience and to pay attention to both. And that it's not one over the other. It's learning how to see it as both and like, yes, like there is this dynamic that has been identified. And at the same time, you might have a different experience or have someone who expresses things very differently, which can be confusing. And to hold that, to just acknowledge that.
I think looking at your slide as well, the why do I keep finding narcissists kind of goes in with another question that someone's submitted here. So the question, I'm going to kind of paraphrase it, is basically, do victims of narcissistic abuse from parents have a higher risk on being in a relationship with a narcissistic partner? And if so, what can we do about this?
From statistically speaking, yes. Because and I'm saying that especially if they haven't done work, if they haven't recognized it and have started to realize like I need to like understand what has happened. Statistically speaking, it's almost like a lot of psychologists will talk about like it's almost like there's this magnetism, like they're able to find each other in this like world of 7 billion people. Like they're just, and that's because um, especially if you had a parent who was a narcissist and they treated you that way, they set an imprint of like, oh, this is what a relationship is like, this is what love is like, even though it wasn't good. And it continues into adulthood. It has set a blueprint, so it's in a way they like it's very unconscious too. Like no one goes out of their way being like, I want to be treated this way. Like this is like what love is. It's unconscious. We don't know it. So we get caught in that like with going back to this cycle, there's another one that I was looking at, which is like at first it's all like perfection, like, oh, you're so wonderful. Like we both like we're like hashtag power couple, like so amazing. Look at like what we're gonna build together. And like so there's that seduction into that because in a way, as a child, you were probably seduced by something your parents did. And like if like that like makes you feel loved and then you go through it and what happens is if we don't know any better like oh it can be different like when I've worked with people like I just have so many stories that bring tears to my eyes where like after working with them for whatever it could be, so this isn't just about narcissism, like sometimes they'll just look at me and they're like I didn't know a relationship could be like this. And I think it shows that like sometimes like we are completely ignorant of what it is, so we just go back into familiar patterns. So that is why someone who has been abused by a narcissist goes back to those patterns if they're not realizing there's other ways for relationships to be lived out, or there's other ways that I can do that. And that starts first with personal work. Like they like awareness is key. For most psychological things, you have to have awareness of like, oh, this is going on. And as I become aware of it, I can now choose how I'm going to respond to it. I can make changes. And that's hard. But yes, there is quite a bit of literature that shows that they do find each other. It's like another parallel to this is when you look at intimate partner violence. Like a lot of times you will see survivors of intimate partner violence continue to go back to abusers because that's the relationship they're familiar with. So I'll just leave it there and see if there's any like more questions around that.
I'll just add to that, just speaking from my own experience as well. I think we're so lucky that we have God because without God, our suffering would be purposeless and it would be so much more damaging. Like our suffering has a purpose that we're meant to profit from it in some way. How that will come about, we don't know how our life's going to unfold, but I do really believe I'm going to give a plug for God here, like putting God first and asking Him to really make sense of like how we're supposed to figure out and navigate the situation. It becomes like this beautiful journey of faith and healing. And I know in my life, like our suffering is not going to always make sense, but God has a plan for it if we turn to him, and he can help us profit from it. And I'll leave it at that. And I just want to add a follow-up to that. How can you support a partner if they've been in a narcissistic, let's say they suffered narcissistic abuse? How can you support your partner in a relationship?
That's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is like a there like with like a sorry, I'm collecting my thoughts here. Excuse me as I babbled along. I think the first thing that comes up for me is not to take over. So, a survivor of narcissistic abuse is someone who has been taken over and maybe felt controlled or had walking on eggshells. And I think being able to allow them the agency and power to be able to um, talk about it. And some of it also depends on like where they are on their own healing journey, because I think that's a huge variable that I just have to say. Like some people are very articulate and they can be like, this is what I'm needing from you. They're able to tell their partner, which is really wonderful. The other thing is to be really mindful of like I guess the best thing is to talk about trauma-informed care, which is this buzzword that you'll hear out there all the time in social media. And I like will say I don't like how it gets thrown everywhere, but I think what it does is it helps us realize that sometimes the best support that we can do is to just be present. I think too often, especially with our partners, when we love someone and we see them maybe getting triggered or being activated in some way or falling back into an old pattern, is we want to save them. We want to make them not feel it. And what I truly believe is if we want to be healed, we have to feel. And not to save your partner, your loved one from their feelings. Like just recognize like they can handle it. And then here's the other question is, can you handle it? Are you going to be able to hang in there and like be stable and be like, okay, I can be here with you. I don't know what to say, which is okay. I think it was Catherine talked about like our society day and technology. We're super loud. Like there, like someone always has to be talking or responding. And I think sometimes learning to be like, all right, I'm going to be here with you, and I don't know what to say. And guess what? That's okay. Because I think in those moments, it's like, okay, let the Holy Spirit come in. Like, we don't need to take control of every situation. Leave space. It's okay to be quiet. But then also be able to debrief. Like, if maybe there's a conflict around, like, you're like, this is a dynamic due to past abuse that keeps coming into our relationship, finding a time when it's not activated. So we're in our zone of tolerance, we're calm, and being able to talk through it, being like, wow, we really suck at navigating this. Like, what can we do differently? And really working together, and allowing both of you to talk about the experience, allowing the person like to be like, and this is like going back to that one slide where it's hard to articulate experience. That's actually really frustrating. Like when you're like, I'm trying to help you, but I don't, but you're not telling me what you need. And I think being patient, because that matters so much, is being patient with someone to let them know, like, I'm here for you and I don't have an agenda for you, that I love you right where you're at. And I think that models like I worked a few summers at a Catholic summer camp, and one of our favorite lines for the campers was like, God loves you right where you're at, but loves you too much to let you stay there. And I think modeling that in our own relationships, where it's like, I'm going to love you right where you're at, even if it's messy, even if it's chaotic. And then I love you too much that we're going to work our way to a new place. So those are some thoughts that come to mind, but there are a lot of nuance about like I would want to know like how far in the healing journey are they, like what is being triggered, and like how is it manifesting in the relationship. So like that's where like my therapist brain like takes over, and I want the details to be able to adequately like respond to that question.
Thank you. I love what you said. I think everyone just wants to be seen and heard. And you're right, like sometimes we can't even verbalize what's going on or what we need. And sometimes we can't equip ourselves to deal with our partner's emotions, whether that's a family member, a spouse, a sibling. But God can handle our emotions. He can handle all of them as raw as they are. And I think it's just a beautiful opportunity to like guide your partner to God. Like ideally, that in a perfect situation, that's the goal of a partnership is we help each other journey to God closer. And by doing that, God can hopefully reveal how you can best help your spouse, your partner in that circumstance. Not saying it's easy, but I know in my experience, if I have to deal with a narcissist, I just sometimes need to take a step back and be like, I don't know how to deal with this. Or if I have to help someone who's gone through narcissistic abuse, same thing. It's like, okay, I'm going to hold space for you. I'm going to help support you, relate with you. I know God has a plan for you. Okay, God, how can we navigate this together? Because I don't know. I just don't know. Anyone else that wants to jump in with a question, feel free just to unmute yourself and jump in, or you can throw in the chat and I'm happy to read it out loud. Maybe can you share like any interesting stories from a clinical perspective that you've seen, like any positive stories?
Yeah, so you mind if I like stop screen sharing and
Yeah, absolutely.
okay. Um where is it? There we go. So I will say a lot of my stories will more be around like just treatment of trauma generally. Like, and when I say like, so what I mean by that is, I'm trained in EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a highly effective treatment for like PTSD and really minimizing like the traumatic experiences that are very severe in a very quick time. But I would say the work that I love to do is really looking at how suffering and trauma really can interfere with the way we understand our identity, and how we make sense of the world, our perceptions, and um, how we also make meaning. So a story that comes to mind is I work with she's I'll say in her mid-20s, and so one of the things I do is I never diagnose through a person. So like if someone tells me that they had a narcissistic father, I'll just take them at that. Or if I had I will never diagnose, but I never argue with someone. And her father, though, definitely had some very bizarre behaviors and was very wounding. And he like she was the only daughter of five, and he would treat her as a son, make her like punishment was push-ups, and if he favored the boys over her, and he like didn't respect her boundaries. Like he would walk around naked even when she was a teenager, and would be completely like she would be like, "Dad, can you please put on a towel? Can you please do this?" And he would disregard her all the time. There was multiple times that like in their family car they couldn't hold the whole family, so she was left home alone, where they went to a park or things like that. So she had um a lot of father wounds. And um I was working with her as she was coming into the Catholic Church, and as you can imagine, with those wounds there was a lot of God the Father was an extremely dangerous character, to phrase it that way, in her life, because there was this sense of like, well, I'm becoming Catholic. I need to love God because that's what we're supposed to do. Like we're just supposed to outright love God, like, and not deal with that. But there was all of this stuff underneath where like I could see it coming in with how relationship, especially with men in her life, continued to unfold the same way. Is that she had very superficial, like, and she was a very nice girl. Like she was always smiling, always engaged, but she would never go deep with anyone. And she would always sabotage relationships. And I could see that in our own relationship playing out. There was a lot of times like she would start canceling on me. Um, and like as I worked with her, she like we started really working on the father wound. Um, basically like helping her identify, like, and my role was to take what she could bring up, and we're starting to put language to it so that there was this stability of I can now talk about it, because language is really freeing and powerful when we can finally talk about an experience that is authentic and that we have ownership of. And she was able to start talking about it, and she was able to start like seeing, like feeling these emotions that she never was able to express, that she was shut down with, that she wasn't told like they were okay, or she was completely ignored. She would go story after story of what would happen. So like over time, like she, like, I will say, like, I was so proud of her. Like, she worked hard. Like, therapy is work and I work hard, but when I work with someone who works hard, it, like, I am so proud. And like, she now is in a successful relationship, doing really well. Um and like, she tells me that she had this vision, which I'll share with you because I think it, like, is a very um it was very profound for her. She was at adoration, and she talked about, she's like, I was sitting there, I was kneeling at adoration, and I saw Jesus walk towards me, and he sat down next to me, and he kissed me on the cheek and said I was beautiful. And then I just wept for 40 minutes. And, for me and my perspective, I'm not going to process that as a spiritual director or anything, but I was able to take that and really use it as this, like, catalyst to really understanding, like, she had this extremely, extremely important, powerful experience of a loving, like, Christ, and how that was really able to heal in that moment. And we could really then help solidify that experience into how she was interacting with the world, with men in her life, and then also start to work on forgiving her father. So I could keep going. I'll stop there, but